Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic for you today. Let's do it. What's the creepiest thing you've ever seen out in the middle of nowhere? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. So as a kid around 11 or 12, I had the world on my fucking plate. We had these woods around us that I would never ever come close to finding the edge of. I would wake up in the morning early when school was out, and my friend Alex and I would spend the whole day out mucking around those woods. We would pack sandwiches and sodas and just go nuts. Play army and war, cowboys and Indians, you name it. This being the 80s and Alex and I being smart enough kids, my parents had no problem with this and enjoyed taking us to the army surplus store to buy stuff like MREs and survival knives and camping gear. It was pretty regular that we would be allowed to stay out overnight if my dad was there to help us set up camp close to the property. So, not on an overnight, but out and about one day we find a treehouse in a part of the woods we've never been to before. Probably about a 2-hour trek from the edge of my neighborhood. Maybe 2 miles or 3. It was hilly and rocky. Seriously, a kid's dream. This treehouse is probably 30 feet off the ground, but it looks solid. We are so stoked to find our new castle. We hightail it back home to get some rope, and my pops takes us down to the surplus store, and over dinner, Alex and I can't shut up about it. Next day comes, and we hike out at almost dawn. We got a backup full of rope and sandwiches, and our knives on our hips, and excitement that's so thick we could chew on it. We make it out there and start attaching rungs made from big sticks and onto one end of the rope. It took us a good few hours, but we get one side finished and the rope tossed over the branch. That's where the little deck and door are. We finally climb up and are sitting on the deck looking out and rock, paper, scissors for who gets to go in first. Alex wins and goes in and comes right out. He's white as a sheet and wants to go home. So curious as I am, I go inside. The treehouse is probably 8 by 8 and about 7 to 8 high inside. The inside walls are covered every single inch of naked girls. Not awesome found Playboy porn, but kiddie pee. I think the oldest kids were about my age, but it was Polaroids and glossy magazine pages, stuck perfectly up with staples and filling the walls up. Exit Alex and I getting back home as quick as we could. We informed my pops about it, and he calls the cops. The officer shows up and asks us a few questions like where it is. How did we get up there? Where did we buy the rope? Did we take any pictures off the wall? He got increasingly rude about it, and my pops put an end to it. He left with our statement and said he would be in touch. We were no longer allowed to take overnights in the woods or be out there for more than an hour without checking in. We actually built a really long tin can phone with the permission of my parents, which allowed us a bit more of our freedom, but we were pretty cut off from the deep exploring. About a year or two later, that same cop stopped me when I was hanging out in a different park, saw me smoking and caught me with a joint. Alex asked him whatever happened with the treehouse. The cop told us not to do drugs and left us alone. In college, many moons later, Alex sent me an email saying how he read in the big state paper towns that they say the county seat have their own papers, but the capital city has the big paper. That officer shot himself with his service revolver after his wife found out he was circulating CP. So it comes to my mind, like it came to Alex's, that we had found his little CP stash cave. The creepy part came a few months later when Alex sent me another email saying that he went to the estate auction and one of the items for sale was a rope ladder with a bag. Creepiest story of found in the woods I have, folks. Still grosses me out and sends chills. Was DJing a wedding in a little prairie village about 100 kilometers from my city. Packed everything up once things wound down and was the last one out of the venue at 3 a.m. Started to drive toward the highway and saw a big orange glow emanating from the other side of a ridge on the other side of the railway tracks. Decided to check it out, as it was so even and smooth. I'd never seen a light like that before. Was thinking it might be some huge bonfire for the wedding's after party. Had to drive up 1 or 2 kilometers to cross the tracks to crest the ridge, and once I did, the light was still off on the horizon. Drove toward it for a few kilometers, but it didn't seem to be getting any nearer. Decided it wasn't a bonfire, and I didn't want to get myself into trouble, so I turned around and headed back to the city. 50 kilometers later, I got to the main highway, so I decided to look back, and the light was just as big in the sky as it was back in the village. Looked at the news the next day, and found out what had happened. A few underground natural gas storage tanks had ruptured and combusted, which caused an absolutely massive fire, where there was no option but to let it burn until it ran out of fuel. Ended up burning for 3 or 4 days. Would have been okay had I drove on to see the fire, probably just as well that I didn't. It was very weird and ethereal seeing that light. It had such a quiet might to it, and it was drawing me to it like a moth. When I was a weird teenager, I had this strange thing that I would just take night walks in areas with no lights, mostly forest walking paths. My logic then was facing fears and feel awesome after. On one night, it was pitch black. Could really not see far. So I was doing my thing and I just bumped into someone else. Saw him at the very last moment. I just screamed and started running back, only to hear him chasing me. I could hear the sound of his footsteps. Then after a while, they became more distant. I did a Forrest Gump and just kept running. Never went for a night forest walk again. Thinking back, my guess would be that he was perhaps a forest ranger or something. Back then, I figured serial killer. Years and years ago, I went with a friend to visit his grandparents. We were late teens, not really middle of nowhere, but sufficiently separated from civilization. There was a creek running between the property and their neighbors, and he wanted to go out catching frogs before we left. We go about half a dozen in the creek when he spots a conspicuous pile of sticks and leaves at the base of a tree on the neighbor's property, where someone had clearly tried to conceal something. Our curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to check it out. It was a plastic freezer bag filled with straight-up child pee. I don't mean just naked pictures of kids or anything less than explicit, children having S or being R'd. It was bad. We covered it back up and told the grandfather, who told us he'd notify the police and handle it. We expected to hear from the cops, but never did, and more or less forgot about it. 10 years later, the old man dies and his 5 daughters and some of their daughters come forward with tales of years of brutal S and emotional abuse. That goddamned stash was his. It had to be. I lived by the Adriatic coast of Italy. One summer night in 2013, I was with some friends on the beach having a party, when at around 1 a.m., I climbed the rocks to find a place to piss. There was a full moon, and I could see very clearly. I walked away from the beach until I saw a small cove, a small sandy bay, invisible from the inland but easily reachable from the rocks. I thought it was the best spot to relieve my bladder, and went there. As I neared, I distinctly saw that there was a man, a fat, very big man in his 50s, sitting in the sand doing absolutely nothing, his head tucked in his arms. I should have known better, but I closed and asked if he needed anything. thinking he might have been feeling unwell. He raised this bull-like head and started screaming madly to get away from him, lest he killed me by cracking your head on the rocks. I scrambled and ran like crazy back to my friends. I turned backwards, and as I was relieved to find that he wasn't following me, we called the police, who came and discovered that he was a mentally ill person who hadn't taken his medications, and his family had declared missing in the afternoon. They managed to reassure him without resorting to violence and escorted him back to his habitation. It was the only time that I really feared for my life. A girlfriend and I took a 2-week road trip last year and backwoods camped and hiked the whole time. Inside, I'm also a girl. 2 20-some-year-olds out on the road. We got to one free campsite in the middle of nowhere, New Mexico, and we were the only people there. Not unusual, so we just take the first spot and set up. As we make dinner, a couple pulls in, drives by, and heads to the back of the campgrounds. No idea how far it went back. About 20 minutes later, they come back by and flag me down. Girl. Have you guys been back there? Me. No. Girl. It's like a massacre back there. Me. What do you mean? Girl. There's bones everywhere. Mind if we take the spot next to you? Me. Not at all. Now we're happy to have neighbors. They stay maybe 2 minutes, look around, get back in their car and leave. Friend. What was that all about? I explained to my friend what the girl said, and at that moment, we look down and see a huge femur bone under our feet, possibly a cow. Well, us being a little cryptic, decided to go check out what they were talking about. We get about 100 yards back through the windy camp, and there it is. Full-blown animal carcasses everywhere. Some scattered, some still whole, one pile of what looked like fox fur, and another deer body still in a trash bag. Our theory is that it's where they dump all the roadkill they scrape up off the highway, but we didn't figure this until a few days later. Nonetheless, if there's that many bodies here from whatever cause, then other predatory animals know they're here too. I don't want to be around when they come by for dinner. We decide to pack up and find a different camp. Free campsite number 2 of the night. We drive for about an hour or so, still in the middle of nowhere, haven't seen a single car this entire time. No houses, just old country roads and pastures. Mind you, the sun is starting to set. The road turns to dirt for a bit. We cross a cattle guard and see the national park sign. Sweet. It's a national park and it's free. It can't be too bad. My friend thinks it looks a little sketchy, but we're ready to relax and get some grub. So I hit a left and start up the hill to the national park. Looks like it's only about 2 miles from the map. Start going up this road, go around a few curves, the brush on the side starts getting thicker and thicker, and the road starts getting thicker and rough. Now, to put this in perspective, we are in my fairly new Chevy Cruze manual transmission that is less than a foot clearance from the ground. About a quarter mile in, and we have high center on a huge rock. Okay, as long as this doesn't get any worse, I think we can manage. There's no possible way to turn around or back out anyway, so let's keep going. Of course, it gets worse. Every rock and trench we hear the car just scrape and stutter and stall. I'm clinching the wheel, she's clinging on the handle. All the brush on the side of us is now dead and eerie looking, and the sun is almost gone behind us. 30 terrifying minutes later, we finally make it to the top flat that is supposed to be a campsite. It's about a 10 square foot clearing in the dead brush, and in front of us, a cliff. We're still freaked out about the dead animals, and now we feel like we're in the plot of some low-budget horror film, literally trapped on top of this hill. It's dark, and neither of us even want to get out of the car. We decide we cannot in our right mind stay here? Even from this cliff top, we can't see a single house or car light. We make a 10-point turn between the brush and the boulders and the cliff, manage to get back on the path, and very slowly and carefully creep ourselves all the way back down that damned hill. We and the car miraculously survive, and we head another 2 hours back to the closest town and sleep in the Walmart parking lot. A few years ago, a friend and I went to explore a nearby limestone cave. I'd been there before, but I'd never gone very deep. I'd read of a waterfall which eventually led to an expansive area beyond, so we set out to try and find the path. Since we've never been on this route, we take turns going forward and checking back to avoid passing points of no return without one of us being above with a rope to toss down. After the familiar route was behind us, we found a tight climb down. The squeeze was like going from the front seat to the back seat in a compact sedan that's vertical. No problem. Next, we found a tunnel wide but short. We took off our packs and dragged them behind our feet while we crawled maybe 10 to 15 meters. It was getting a little claustrophobic, but we knew what we were getting into. We came to a small opening about the size of a half bathroom. This space we could stand in, and so was a bit of a relief. The path forward was a small square tunnel, the same height as the previous route, but maybe 2 meters wide. We jokingly called it the coffin crawl. This route required us to go one behind the other and led to a 90-degree turn. At the turn, I could see the path continued on past the range of my headlamp, but mostly all seemed level and safe. At this point, slowly it became apparent the path was getting more narrow, ever so slightly. If we wanted to turn back, we would have had to crawl backwards single file. I could not speculate how far we crawled, but it seemed like a very long ways until I could see a small opening ahead, maybe the size of a cramped coat closet, but 2/3 the height. At this point, that space was looking pretty comforting, because it would mean we could at least turn around if we decided to go back. Right before the coming closet-sized space was the tightest squeeze I've ever tried in a cave. I had to place one arm ahead and drag one to get my shoulders to fit diagonally. As my light illuminated the closet space, I could see a single stalagmite in the center and some bats resting on its walls and sloped ceiling. Small mouse-eared bats were infrequent but not a shocking sight until our voices disturbed them and they decided to exit past our prone one-by-one bodies. Their fluttering should have been non-threatening, but in combination with the inability to get out, it became very unsettling. It took a lot of mental control to avoid panicking from the lack of space, apparent lack of air, and astro heebie-jeebies. After the bats had passed, and I had caught my breath and sanity, we entered the small opening. Upon the single stalagmite was a small note, the torn corner of a piece of notebook paper. The note read in blue pen, "Nothing here." We had not found the path we sought, and instead found nothing. An abandoned elementary school in the middle of the woods. I found it when I was around 10 years old while exploring at my dad's hunting club in the backwoods of Alabama. The odd thing about it was that it didn't seem to have a road leading to it or even a place to park cars, but everything inside was from the 60s and 70s. It also seemed to be abandoned quickly. Books were still opened on desks, shoes still in the cubbies, and papers still on the teachers' desks. I actually took a lot of the books that weren't weather damaged and brought them home with me. I remember asking my dad about it a few years later, and he knew about it but said it gave him the creeps, so he never went near it. My dad left that hunting club a year later, so I never had the chance to check it out a second time. Thinking back to my childhood, we used to find sumps. I don't know if that's a common thing in your town, but there were like these town-owned holes in the ground that I guess maybe at one point had a sewage or something. I don't know. I really don't know what a sump is, but there were a bunch in my neighborhood. They were all emptied and dried. We would kind of sleigh ride down them in the winter, and in the summer we'd go exploring. And we came upon this one, and we played there for years. It was like a house or like a long shed that was just completely sunk into the ground, but the roof, the shingled roof, was there. We used to play on that. It really made no sense, and there was no street near it. So I don't know, probably like some old farmer's storage shed or chicken coop, but yeah, I don't know. Otherwise, we've seen a lot of dead animals in weird positions and stuff like that. I used to run bread for a big bread company and started at 3 a.m. I had to drive a few remote stores in little towns surrounding my town. I was about halfway through the 50-mile drive in the next town. It was dark out, and there are no houses around for a long way in any direction. I look on the side of the road ahead of me and see a backhoe, which was odd in itself. Then I noticed his bucket is super high, and as I'm getting closer, I realize he's gutting a cow that is hanging from the bucket. Now, I happen to have grown up around ranching, so I wasn't too freaked out. So for some reason, I decided to slow down and see if this guy needs help. I can't explain this decision. When I stopped next to him, he just smiles and waves, so I do the same thing and ask, "Need a hand?" He just cracks up laughing, like hysterical knee-slapping laughing. For some reason, I start laughing too. Now we're two guys cracking up, laughing, one covered in blood, the other with a truck full of bread. The reality of this situation makes its way into my sleep-deprived brain, and I hit the gas and get out of there. I thought about it and realized this guy drove a tractor into the middle of nowhere to kill someone else's cow. He was probably poaching this thing, and he was just going to load some of the thing into his front bucket and drive this shit back to his house at 3 a.m. Who knows how far away he had to drive that thing. No idea what the hell was hammering, but the whole thing was pretty creepy thinking back. While studying abroad, a friend of mine wanted help on doing a photo shoot on a derelict building in the outskirts of the city. The building was a small, run-down office building with most of the outer walls covered in brick, all the entrances as well. Anyways, she had the idea of just wanting to walk around with the camera and explore, and I went with her. Upon arrival shortly, I noticed that on the ground there were a lot of used needles. Really gross ones with brown dried blood, etc. This shady place must have been a popular shooting up place with the local junkies. Then we found that on one of the brick-laden walls an entrance had been made into the stairway of the building. Somebody had just tore a hole in the wall. In some surge of bravery, we decided to go in to get some pictures. The stairway was dark because all the windows were covered. The building had been stripped of most valuable material, so it was just a concrete stairway. We started to make our way to the second floor when we heard a loud shuffling sound upstairs, like somebody rising up to the front of the floor. We immediately turned around and practically jumped through the hole and ran out as fast as we could. Thinking back, it was just probably some junkie taking a nap, and we scared each other, but holy hell, I've never felt adrenaline as strong as that. I was driving to visit my sister who lives in Missouri. It's late, and I admit I was a bit tired, but not bad enough where I should have pulled over to a hotel. I get to this stretch of road where it's just cornfield on either side of me. I have directions to drive straight and take the next left. I drive and drive and drive and drive. No lefts, but multiple rights. Every now and again there might be a left, but it's a small man-made road that wasn't big enough for my car. I start getting a bit confused on where I was supposed to turn because I'd been driving straight for like 45 minutes and still no turn in sight. I passed a left turn that was big enough for my car, but it was a dirt road. I figure, hell, that's probably it. I take the next right and end up driving around a fucking cornfield paved road maze. I ended up lost for about 2 hours before I finally found the small dirt road. I drive up it and find myself at a house. This was obviously not the right left, so I threw it in reverse and went to leave when I saw light from my field of view and movement. I look over, and it's just a large group of people, over 10, standing around a fire and coming my way. It's like 3 a.m. I was lost. I had been driving in a maze for about 2 hours. I was tired, and I'd had enough for one night, so I drove off. I got lost again and ended up driving about 2 hours in the wrong direction. Found a gas station, waited for morning, and rang my sisters to help me find where the hell the road was. As you can tell, this was before cell phones and GPS became super prevalent. I was driving back to school one fall. It's about a 12-hour drive, and I was doing it all in one go. There's a lot of middle of nowhere and teeny tiny towns on this drive. I really had to pee, and there hadn't been anything for quite a while. Finally, there's one of those freeway signs with food, gas, lodging listed for the next exit. I've been driving probably 9 hours at this point. The sign said there was a gas station and a fast food restaurant. Those have bathrooms, so I take the exit. Usually, those signs mean there is something right off the freeway, but I end up following the signs for several miles and finally see the fast food restaurant. It's just starting to get dark. As I pull into the parking lot, this little cat runs in front of my car, but I'm going slowly enough not to hit it. The parking lot is empty, and there isn't much around it, mostly trees. I get out of the car and see another cat, and then another. There are 30 plus cats that I can see, so probably a lot more I don't. There are 3 colorings, all black, orange tabbyish, and a grayish color. So they vary in size, but other than that, they look basically identical to the other cats of their coloring. They're all staring at me. I took a step forward, and they all stepped back about the same amount as my step. And simultaneously, I stepped back. They all moved closer. I walk into the restaurant, get a drink, use the bathroom. I said something to the person at the counter like, "There are a lot of cats out there." But she was just sort of like, "Oh." So I get back to the car, and they are still there and sit up and stare at me again and shift positions as I move. This time, I notice there are giant food networks and food bowls filled with kibble around in trees just past the parking lot. Someone is coming and feeding the cat colony often, and a lot of food. It was very strange. I got in my car and found the freeway. I was driving across country alone on the 10 and was in the middle of the desert. My car said I only had about 20 miles left in gas, so I pulled off to the first place I'd seen for the last hour. Since I was young, sick, and a woman, I made the rule that any time I stopped for gas, I would only pay at the pump and would never leave my car or go inside anywhere aside from the hotels I stayed at. So I swipe my card, and as it's processing, the transaction cancels, and it prompts me to see the cashier. I try again, and halfway through typing in my zip code, it cancels and tells me again to see the cashier. I look toward the convenience store and see it has broken windows, is boarded up, and is completely abandoned. Even the tall station sign is torn apart. I spot someone inside peering at me from between the boards, and the second I see them, they jump away. They clearly didn't want to be seen, but kept trying to get me to come into the abandoned station by canceling the transaction. No. Got back in my car, and by some miracle, made it to the next station 30 miles away. Went on a midnight walk with my girlfriend. The park by her house had a dirt trail that led up a small mountain. It was about a 30-minute walk to the top, but the view overlooking the city was gorgeous. At the top, the dirt path became paved concrete with a small sitting area. We stayed at the top for about 30 minutes. Upon leaving is where things got creepy. As we started to head back down, at the point where concrete met dirt path, there was a large pile of trash bags in a crescent shape in the corner of the path's intersection. It was not there when we first arrived. The pile was much too large and in the way for someone who likes to cut corners of paths to not notice. My girlfriend remarked it how the shape resembled a dead body and asked me if I noticed it on my way up. I was very sure that it was not there 30 minutes prior when we arrived. I was extremely sure. Nonetheless, there was no reason to freak my anxiety-prone girlfriend out, so I laughed and said, yeah, it's been there and was probably just trash. Visibility was extremely low, probably about 5 yards. I didn't want to freak her out, but I was pretty tilted. I got heckled for being drunk and not listening to her, but in actuality, I was looking and listening for any sign of people around us. In my own head, I was telling myself that I'm just being paranoid, that it was probably there and I didn't notice. But at the time, I was also sure that I wasn't. I'm sorry I didn't have time to listen to your story about Jesse from work. I'm worried about our safety at the moment. We made it back to our car without running into anybody, and I kind of laughed at myself for being so worried for nothing and also felt the relaxation of my butt muscles that had been clenched for the last 30 minutes. A few days later, the local news covered a dead body found near a park in Anthem, at the top of the mountain. Guess it was actually a dead body. Literally getting chills just typing that. It was actually a dead body. Thanks, FSM, that my girlfriend didn't watch the news or she would have shat herself.